you can become a published author. Discover a system that will lead you from idea to having your book on the bookshelves. Bob Baer pulls back the curtain at the More Power to Publish workshop. Watch and learn how to follow the step-by-step plan to turn your idea into a published book. Learn more at morepowertopublish.com.
Welcome back to Monetizing Your Mind. Bob Baer's the host. I'm Patrick Dewar. We're really talking about repurposing content. We're giving you, this is really a training video in a sense, though it's on TV in the DFW area in Houston. And normally I would be hosting the Business Spotlight, so I almost messed up on it a minute ago. But I'm so thankful for you guys watching tonight because you're going to be learning about the ways to repurpose content. And then also, if you haven't been to Bob's More Power to Publish conference, he's got one if it's before May, 17th, 18th?
18th and 19th.
18th and 19th in Irvine, California. By all means, go to morepowertopublish.com. Get a seat at that conference. If you've got a book in you or you think you'd like to find out, is it possible? Bob, I know you say it is.
It is. There are so many things that people can do, and it's a matter of knowledge on how to do it and a matter of inspiration to do it. It takes both the motivation and the knowledge. I know some of our listeners have experienced somebody calling them on the telephone for advice. And when someone is asking you questions, when somebody really wants to find out something, I know that sometimes you say things that you feel like, where did that come from? I mean, sometimes I find myself saying statements that I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty good. I wish I had time to write that down. Well, imagine that you're talking to someone on the telephone, and it's one of those long 30-minute conversations. You're at your best. You're really enthused about what you're talking about. You're giving this person one step after the other of this is what you should do. Imagine if you were recording that conversation. And it's not that hard to do. A lot of times with clients, I'll have them call in on a conference line, and I'll tell them ahead of time, let's record this, and then I'll give you a link to the conversation in case you forget something. And I've never had anybody turn me down. They love that ability to go back and listen again to what we talked about. But when I take that information, when I take that recording, I can often transcribe it, put it in writing, and I don't have to say who I was talking to, but some of those salient points, some of the great information that you come up with while you're talking on the telephone can turn into a blog article. It can turn into a video that you film and you talk about and you teach the same thing. It can turn into a webinar where you're teaching those points in a webinar. And capturing those moments is really important in order for you to be able to repurpose it for another use.
But the other thing that you're telling people or encourage people to do is recognize, one, the value in what comes out of their mouth, because people will pay you for what you have inside of your head. I mean, amazingly enough, if they're coming to you, there's a value. If a lot of people are coming to you, it means that you've established yourself as an authority somehow in the minds of people around you, right?
Yes.
And so then to make sure that when you're talking to somebody, that those things are essentially captured. Because I know I've done it the same thing. I've listened, I was talking to somebody and they started talking about the difference between, Vimeo and YouTube and some of these other things. And I literally went, oh my gosh. And I created an article out of the conversation, just like what you're talking about, that was used for distribution. So that's the thing you're talking about, isn't it, Bob? So what are some other ways?
One of the things that we like to do when we have someone, let's say we have a C-level executive that wants to write a book. He doesn't have time. He doesn't really know how to go about outlining it. He doesn't feel like he's a writer. He doesn't feel confident about creating a book. What we've discovered is when you have someone else interview you, just like you and I kind of do to each other, we will sit down with someone. I've sat down with a person and started asking them questions, either filming it or recording it. And when someone forgets that they're on camera, when they forget that there's a recorder on the table, and I start asking them more and more questions, they start remembering things. They'll tell me stories about, I'll say, well, that's interesting. Has that ever happened to you? And so they'll tell me a story about when it did happen to them. And as you get into the interview and you really get into that space, something begins to be created. They're very animated in telling you those stories, and they remember things and come up with things that when we go to take that interview and turn it into content for a book for that person, sometimes they read the book and they say, "Did I say that?" And we say, "Yeah, we've got the recording." And there's just something about interaction with people that's important. And so that's one of the ways, if one of you that are listening want to get content and stories out, find somebody to interview you and record it. Sit down with someone and have them ask you questions over and over. And of course, you have frequently asked questions that you get by email. People ask you, how about this? How about that? Another thing for you to consider is, what are the questions that you know that people should be asking you? And when you're interviewing somebody, or if they're interviewing you, have them ask you, well, what is it that people never think to ask you of, but they should be asking you? That's where you start drawing on some of that expertise that's bottled up inside of someone.
Well, I consider that to be one of the most valuable things. What is it that people should be asking you? You know, when we're sitting here doing the show, we're trying to give you tools, tips, techniques that are going to give you ways to essentially extract that, I call it 9-pound pearl. It's the thing you paid more than you expected to, and everybody else recognizes that you're the authority in that space. Well, if you go to morepowertopublish.com, go to Bob's conference in May, or the one in December in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, October, November time frame in Dallas-Fort Worth, you're going to love what you see. You're going to learn so much about all the things we're talking about. We'll be right back. This is Pat Dewar on Monetize Your Mind.
You can become a published author. Discover a system that will lead you from idea to having your book on the bookshelves. Bob Baer pulls back the curtain at the More Power to Publish workshop. Watch and learn how to follow the step-by-step plan to turn your idea into a published book. Learn more at morepowertopublish.com.